Hi, everyone. I want to make sure that you can see Janet and I and hear us. So if you can see our video, go ahead and let us know in the chat box that we are actually broadcasting to you. Thank you, Trina. Excellent. Awesome, Steve. Janet, why don't you say hello so we can do a quick sound check on your end?
Hello, everyone. Welcome. Happy that you're joining us here today.
Awesome. Okay, so everyone can hear Janet as well, yes? Great.
Right.
Awesome. Thanks so much. We're going to give people just a minute to join us since we're just at the top of the hour now. If you would like to tell us where you're coming from, I see we have some folks already doing that in the chat. We would love to hear where people are logging in from today. So please feel free to go ahead and let us know where you're joining us from. All right. We have some folks in Michigan, Honolulu, Ohio, Colorado, Washington, Montreal. Excellent. And I see more folks joining us from Indiana. And Steve was coming to us from Maryland. Excellent. All right. Well, we have just a short hour together today, so I'm going to go ahead and kick us off. I want to welcome you all to this webinar on overcoming obstacles to collaboration across modalities with our guest, Janet Salmons, who is the author of a recent book, Learning to Collaborate, Collaborating to Learn. And if you want to learn more about this book based on what Janet talks about today, there's a little call to action button at the bottom of the screen that says, learn more about Janet's book. And that will take you to the Stylus website if you want to take a look there. I'm Dr. Katie Linder. I'm also a Stylus author, and it is my pleasure to conduct these wonderful webinars where we get to learn more from our authors about their books and also about their topics and how those books came to be. In today's webinar, you're going to have a chance to ask Janet questions as well. So I want to tell you a little bit about how that's going to work. You have an Ask a Question button, probably at the bottom of your screen. And if you ask a question in that part of the webinar platform, I can actually timestamp Janet's reply in the replay so that people can go directly to that question and hear her response. So if you ask a question in the chat, that's fine too. But that Q&A button is going to be the best so that we can make sure to track all of your questions as we get started today. Now, if you've attended one of these before, you know I come with a ton of questions myself. So I will also have some questions for Janet, but I definitely encourage you to ask questions and also to back channel in the chat along the way. So let's dive in. Janet, do you want to do a quick introduction of yourself and then we'll go into the first question?
Well, hello, everyone. I'm talking to you here from Boulder, Colorado. And I think, just being able to have this kind of communication, and I mean, even though I've done this for a long time, I still just find it really exciting. And to me, that, that's kind of the, where I'm coming from in thinking about collaboration and, the availability, we have of people all over the world to work with. So I look forward to sharing some of my ideas with you today and interacting with you as you ask questions.
All right. Well, welcome, Janet. Let's dive in with learning a little bit more about why collaboration is such a key skill for our students to learn. What is it about collaboration that you think we really need to focus on this in terms of helping students learn how to do it and how to do it better?
Right. I mean, in some ways, the word collaboration has become a bit of a buzzword, and people will say they're collaborating even if they're simply talking together about someone. But really, in whatever walk of life we might be preparing students to enter, being able to truly accomplish things together is just more and more important as time goes on. Even the Sustainable Development Goals point to the importance of partnerships to solve tricky and challenging questions that we face as a society. So, as we're working one-on-one, with other people, a lot of times we'll meet people we feel very comfortable with, and we can just dive in and work together, and everything is great. But, as we talk about crossing boundaries of geography and distance and culture, and as we have more people and more organizations involved with complex collaborations, it becomes, somewhat difficult. So, I feel that, to prepare our students at whatever age they are for the future, simply focusing on solo individual performance kinds of learning activities and the kind of competitive environment that is very common in our educational system is just not enough.
So, Janet, one of the things that I love about your work, and you have multiple books that I have read and really enjoyed, is they're so practical. And I know that a lot of these books really come out of your own experiences of working in a particular area. They are really about helping people to solve, particular problems or giving them practical ideas of how to move forward.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if there are specific experiences that you had in the classroom that led you to write this book and really feel like this was something that people needed in terms of practical advice about how to help students learn to collaborate better.
Right. Well, for quite a while, I was teaching online with adult students, and in teaching classes about team leadership or classes that involve group projects, all of the initial responses students had, were negative. And, even in talking about their experiences in the workplace, working in groups and teams, the gist of the story would usually be about the problems that they had. And those, so as I, started to look at, and really, sort of try to analyze, the kinds of things that I was hearing, it seemed to me that those issues were around, having clear sense of expectations and agreements about, how things were going to get done. And enough time, was allowed, for that. In other words, those activities to plan and make agreements and to the process of the work was as important as the steps of, actually getting the thing done, whether it was an assignment or something in the workplace. And then the other thing that I kept hearing was about rewards in the workplace or assessment evaluation in the classroom. So, part of the fear that people had was, I'm going to do all of the work, but the other people are going to get the same grade, but, they're going to just be skating on, what I'm doing. And, that's not fair. And like, oh, don't make me do this. I mean, I have people over and over again say, don't make me do this. I hate doing these things. So, part of, I think, as I, started to look at, kind of those multiple pieces of it, the collaborative process, what was involved with the collaborative process, the ways that people, can organize their work together, and then the issues around, either assessment or rewards and that sort of thing, those all kind of played into my interest in trying to come up with something. And I initially started with kind of just a rough model, and then that's something that has evolved over time to the kinds of materials that are in this book.
So, Janet, I know you have built a taxonomy that I think is really helpful for, helping people to think about collaboration in the classroom. And this is really a cornerstone of the book. So I know we're going to share a little bit about that. We are going to go ahead and shift into a couple slides because Janet's taxonomy is pretty visual. So we're going to show you what it looks like. I also want to remind people, especially people who came in a couple minutes after we started, there's an Ask a Question feature in this webinar platform. If you have a question for Janet, so as she is sharing her screen and showing us these more information about her taxonomy, if you have a question for her, please feel free to let us know, either in the chat or in that Ask a Question feature. So Janet, can you talk to us a little bit about this taxonomy that's a cornerstone for the book and how you came to develop it?
Well, one of the reasons that I kind of approach this from the thought of creating a taxonomy was that, having studied education, worked in education, Bloom's taxonomy was something that, was kind of a centerpiece in the classes I took and kind of stuck with me for whatever reason. And so then, as I started to really look at, different kinds of models, I was inspired by Bloom's taxonomy because it's something that, if you Google it, there's like 6 zillion hits, because people have found a way to apply that conceptual model, in all kinds of settings, and academic and non-academic. So I thought, if I could do something that would have, that kind of applicability, people could use it in their own ways, that would be of value. And this taxonomy, it's, even though it looks like it's a linear model, is really, not meant to be a linear model. And, as we go, you'll, kind of get a sense of that. But, the way that I look at this is, the kind of 2 pieces. One is thinking about this as a conceptual framework for designing, planning, and assessing either collaborative learning, collaborative projects, and then creating a visual language that people can use to put together their own plans that they can then share and use, as a kind of inspiration to help them keep on track. And then also, to be able to look back and see, well, what did we do, and what might we have needed to do in the process. So I'm going to just walk through this quickly, so that you can have a sense of what I have put together here. So the first part of the taxonomy are kind of the process-oriented pieces, and at the top is the reflection. And this was a piece that I added based on what I learned from my research, from the research participants and the studies that I've done, over time. Did a series of qualitative studies that help to really evolve this model, so that it's something that hopefully makes sense in terms of practice. But I think this reflection piece is very important, because as we come into a group, we need to be able to say, well, how do I fit into this group? What do I think about it? How do I make sense of it? How do I deal with the differences, and how do I understand what's going on? And then, what other, kinds of ideas might be stimulated by my interaction with people that I want to, keep track of for, other future projects. So, this reflection piece, I think, is something that's important. And you don't often see, when you're looking at literature about collaboration, the importance of the individual. In other words, there's the importance of the group, but there's also, the group is made up of individuals. The second piece, dialogue. So here you might think, well, duh, how could you not have dialogue if you're communicating about a project together or an assignment together? But here I think, it's trying to, look at all of the dimensions of the dialogue. How do we stay focused on the work that we have at hand? How do we decide what kinds of communications we're going to use? Do we all have the same tools or not? When do we need to communicate synchronously, whether it's a face-to-face meeting or a meeting like we have right now, where we're online? When do we need to really put our heads together and talk, at the same time, versus sending emails back and forth or shared documents and that sort of thing. So when do we use what kind of communication? How do we do that within our project? That's, a piece that people, I think, need to think through from the beginning and throughout. Then the third is what I term review. So if we are working on something together, I need to be able to trust you to look at my part of this project and give constructive feedback about it. And, we need to be able to, do that in a, reciprocal, mutual fashion in order to, figure out how we're going to put these pieces together later on. So, that review piece, I think, is important and can be very scary when you're starting with people, with whom you have not collaborated before. Then the second part of the taxonomy is kind of more, then how do we organize the actual work? So in the top level would be, the parallel. This is, probably the most common. If someone said to all of us, okay, you've got this big project to do together, we might say, okay, you do this part, Katie, you do this, I'll do that, Sue will do that, and Bob will do that. And then we'll, so we'll be working in parallel. To do that, we have to have some agreement about timing, quality, style, format, etc. In addition to, whatever the content might be for a particular assignment or project. The next one, sequential, same deal in terms of dividing things up. But here we'd say, okay, I'll do the first part, then I'm going to give it to Katie, she's going to do the second part, and then it will go on to someone else. So here we have all of the things we had to consider with the parallel collaboration, but now we need to also have a timing factor where we say, well, when is that first part going to be done so I can move to the second part? What is the quality standards I'm expecting from that first part so that I have what I need to build to the second part? And if we have a bunch of people involved who are doing steps in a sequential fashion, how are we going to engage all of those people when the time comes to put the whole thing together if we're trying to create one outcome from this? And then the final one, synergistic, the final one on this slide, synergistic, this would be where, we are all, we're brainstorming, we're all throwing stuff in there. We can't easily, once we put the whole thing together, we can't tease out what part did Katie do, what part did Janet do, because, we've, melded the whole thing together, all along the way. So, I'm not going to get into the assessment piece right now, but I would like to just point out that, out of these processes, we might collaborate in order to produce individual outcomes. So we might have, for example, a writing group where we're all collaborating to learn about, how to write a dissertation or how to write a short story or whatever it might be. We're going to write, I'm going to write my own short story, but the learning is collaborative, about, how to do it. Or from the reflection piece, I might have, perhaps a journal or some element of this project that I'm going to complete individually and that will be, expected as part of the outcomes of the project. And then the other big star represents the collective outcome. So here, once we have organized our work and we've gotten all of these pieces, we're, going to put them all together into one document or one report or one presentation or whatever, so that, we've got one outcome. So if we start to think about assessment, then, we can think of, in terms of the collaborative process, what parts of it are going to lead to an individual outcome, a collective outcome, or perhaps both. So that, in a nutshell, is the taxonomy.
So Janet, I'm actually wondering, can you go back to that first slide for just a moment? Because I would love to ask our audience a question about what they see with these 6 different elements that you're talking about here. Can you share again and go back to that first slide?
Can you see it?
Not yet. I don't think you're sharing your screen.
Oh, I guess it decided to take me back. Hold on one second. I can do this.
So the question I have for our audience as we're going back to that first slide is, which of these areas do you think is the most challenging for your students? If you had to think about reflective projects that you do in the classroom, and you're thinking of these 6 areas of Janet's taxonomy, which is the one that you think is kind of most challenging for your students? Is it the reflection? Is it the dialogue, the review, or a certain kind of collaboration, whether it be parallel, sequential, or synergistic? Let us know in the chat. Is there a particular element of this that you think is something that students really struggle with or are challenged by? All right, so we have some folks saying, I don't think my students even do the reflection. The sequential collaboration is challenging. Synergistic can be hard because of their schedules. Yes. Another vote for reflection. Let's see. The reflection and the parallel collaboration. And then we have some notes here about the importance of that prompting the individual reflection. The review being challenging because they're concerned about hurting each other's feelings.
Right.
All right. So it's interesting. A lot of these comments, it's not like there's one area that people are challenged by or that their students are challenged by. It's actually many of the different areas because it can be challenging to kind of put all of these things together into one piece. So the next question I have for our audience here is, this is what your students are challenged by. What do you find the most challenging as an instructor when it comes to helping your students to collaborate? Is there a particular area of the taxonomy that you think is challenging from an instructor perspective, from your own experience?
And while they're typing their comments in there, given the response that you had from the question you just asked, Katie, where some people think that the individual reflection is difficult. Some people think that review is difficult. Well, when you have a group of people who are put together, if I'm scared to death to share my work with you because I think, she's going to think my writing style is terrible, or that I'm really, everybody else in this group is smarter than I am, and they're going to think I'm really, what I've contributed is really dumb, or if we divide this up in a parallel way, then two of us are going to do a good job and the third person is going to do a horrible job. And then what are we going to do then? So if we've all got different strengths and different fears, but we haven't had a chance to really kind of bring that out into the open to really, be a part of the learning experience, then, you can see right away that, tensions begin to build, to say, I don't want to do this, just let me write my own darn paper, and, I don't want to deal with these other people. So it's naturally, this is why, why I think that, there's a value in actually talking about the collaborative process and what's involved, as a part of the experience.
Absolutely. So we have some comments here about working with students who are English language learners. So dialogue might be difficult for them. Grading the group work is a challenge. Helping students to select the best collaboration type to get the project done. The synergistic being challenging because they just want to parse things out and coordinate individual contributions rather than find time to work together. Helping them to understand the importance of developing trust. So that's definitely an important piece. Some really good comments here. Thank you, everyone, for your contributions. We do have some questions coming in from the audience, Janet. So I'm going to go ahead and dive into some of those.
Okay.
So a first question is coming from Bonnie, who says, where do you think editorial consolidation fits into this model? And she's speaking from the context of having worked with that model herself as an initial plan for her dissertation way back, and as one aspect of a reference that she's offering from some work about collaborative development. What are your thoughts on that, Janet?
So I'm going to go back to my, let's see, whoops, I think I've hit the wrong thing here. Let's try to. Okay, is it sharing my screen now?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Okay. So I think, with the parallel and the sequential, styles of collaboration, then, we have the issue that Bonnie brought up, where the rubber meets the road, because then, we've got to figure out how to meld those, separate pieces into, if we're trying to then create one collective outcome. So, here's where, say, the next stage after the parallel would probably be a review stage, where we're going to look at each other's contributions and say, okay, this is something we want to include. This is something that, this is extraneous. We're not going to, put this in the final product. We need to, make time, for students to go through that process, and some guidance around that, because, certainly, the dialogue and review piece, needs to happen in order to kind of unite those separate elements into something that comes together. Or it might be that that's when we need to have the synergistic time, where we've now completed all the work we could do separately. Now we need to work in a more synergistic way to pull all of these pieces together. So I think that that is definitely that's one of the challenging pieces. But again, why I feel like coming up with a clear plan, where you could say, well, wait a minute, we can't leap from here to the final, we need some steps in between here. And what are those steps? Is this where we need to schedule a meeting so we can do some synergistic time? Or do we say we're going to appoint, Katie, say, Katie, would you, your part of your role in this team will be the one to take all these drafts, put it into one document, and send it out to everybody so that, we can all look at it. So, there are a variety of ways that people can address that stage of it.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Okay, so we have another question coming from Steve. He says, many jobs will involve working in a flexible, hybrid, or blended environment where the student has some flexibility in choosing media, including travel to face-to-face meetings. Factors might include whether the interactions will be cross-cultural, the nature of the task, the time, the budget, etc. My question, do you know of any institutions teaching students how to create and work in flexible hybrid environments after graduation?
In terms of particular kinds of academic programs that are doing that?
Yeah, maybe it could be at the disciplinary level, or just other schools that are kind of emphasizing this.
I think that, say, the kinds of classes that I taught when I was teaching in the School of Business at Capella, that was something that we were, certainly trying to prepare people for, in terms of the kind of global workplace that we're in. And, it's hard for me to know, in terms of a particular program that I would recommend. But I think that, say, as we, that it's certainly a big element behind my model. And, when I started out, I was focusing, more particularly on online collaboration, say, collaborative e-learning and online collaboration. With this book, I've kind of gone to more of, thinking in terms of a blended approach, because sometimes we are entirely online. Sometimes some people might be, the same principles apply even if you're face to face. People who are working in the same building are still using electronic tools. So I think that that the hybrid concept is more and more important today. To me, one of the big questions that I ask is, whether it's hybrid in terms of synchronous and asynchronous online communication, or online and face-to-face, when we have that chance to be together in real time, whether we're electronic or in the same room, how are we going to use that time? Perhaps you have had this kind of experience yourself, where you're working with people remotely, then you finally come together, and somehow you end up in a situation where you're sitting in a lecture hall listening to somebody talk, and you're thinking, what, I could have just watch this on video. Why did I get on a plane to come here, and sit, and listen to somebody talk? So, how do we, really think strategically about, the trust building we can do when we're face to face, the figuring out our dialogue processes, how are we going to, work together once we go, once we split up again? What kind of synergistic activities do we want to do? So if I were teaching with this model in a hybrid kind of blended learning situation, then, that's not only what I would want to be doing, but also to help the students to think about, what activities work best electronically? When do we really need to talk about stuff? That might be around when, the answer to the question that we just had. We've all, we've done a bunch of separate pieces of this thing, but now we've got to put the puzzle together. Maybe that's the time when we need to, be face to face. So, again, what my kind of thing that I'm trying to encourage people to think about is, to be strategic about what kinds of activities to do, and what is the best mode to do them in, and actually including the discussion of the process along with, whatever the content kinds of, curricular material might need to be included.
All right, thank you, Janet. So I think Steve has raised kind of an interesting question in the larger sense of, we know that teaching students about collaboration could help them in the work environment. I'm wondering if you can also address, Janet, other benefits of helping students practice collaboration in the classroom. You talked about kind of this idea of also metacognition and helping them to reflect. Are there other benefits that you think will help instructors, that will benefit students if they're practicing collaboration in the classroom?
Well, part of it is just like anything. If we've tried it, and perhaps we've tried and failed, we have a better sense when we encounter this thing again, whatever it may be. So building their confidence and their, feeling that, I know, I understand how, these different kind of dimensions of the collaborative process. And so I can start to think, you know what, I tried the parallel thing last time and that really didn't work with what I was trying to do. I think it would be better if I, used another approach. They have more of a sense of a toolbox rather than just saying, in other words, if my choice is collaborate versus work individually, that might be, then it sets up kind of more of a polar opposites versus saying, well, there are different kinds of collaboration. There are different styles of collaboration. What's going to fit this project? And is collaboration even the best approach? Is this something that really should just be done as an individual? When should this kind of approach be used, and how? So that's a part of it. I think another part of it is, understanding the difference between, what we do in a group and what we do as an individual. At what point, if we're collaborating, at what point do I start to think in terms of we instead of I? That I am a member of this group, or we are doing this together. How does that reflection and sense making kind of promote your, ability to say, when am I going to feel like I trust these people and I'm going to throw my hat into this ring? I just feel that having those kinds of experiences give people more insight into, the kinds of decisions that you have to make, and, where different styles of communication might be effective. So I had the opportunity to go back and talk with students I had worked with in the past. I designed a course using this taxonomy, as the model for the course. after I taught the course, I went back and did a follow-up study. It went through IRB and the whole thing, so I could interview those students. And one of the things that really stuck out was that they said, well, now when I come up with a group project, I'm not afraid of this anymore. So it's that confidence piece, but then also it's the piece about understanding how to make agreements with people. So how to make agreements, how to troubleshoot when problems arise. So I think having those experiences in the classroom, it's then less intimidating when you confront those things in a workplace or community setting, whatever it may be.
Okay, so we have a couple more questions that have come in, Janet. Someone is coming from the experience of cooperative experiences in curriculum committee for mechanical engineering, and they're wanting to know about providing students instructions in sophomore or junior years to become better collaborators, and how best to provide feedback to help them get better, or to teach them to handle team dysfunction or some of those kinds of challenges. Do you have thoughts on instruction and feedback on kind of the process side of what this should look like in terms of working with students who are maybe a little bit more advanced in their undergraduate years?
Right. Well, I mean, as kind of a similar situation, how do you teach critical thinking? At what point do you stop and say, hey, what we just did in this exercise involved critical thinking? It's the teachable moment, kind of thing. Like, so, to me, trying to, think about, so if your topic is mechanical engineering and, the kinds of challenges or expectations in the workplace around that field, building in, time to talk about the how rather than just the what, so I think part of it is trying to figure out, get in your, activity plan, your lesson plan, curriculum, whatever, if this is an important piece, then, does this become part of your learning objectives that are then measured so that, it's out front to people, that the people in the class, that, this is something that we're talking about, not just whatever the, engineering piece is, but also you as a professional, in, working in a team, having to, figure out how to plan and manage projects that involve other people, that's just as important as knowing how to, let's face it, probably, I can't say in terms of mechanical engineering, but my guess is that if something falls apart, it's probably more because of the process and communication and people being unable to feel that they could trust the other people to work together. That probably causes more problems than not knowing how to, actually do, whatever the engineering task might be. So, I think that it's making it visible and obvious in your discussions, talking about it and talking about what, how to deal with things when they go wrong. So, one of the points that no one's asked about yet, but I wanted to just make sure to include here in terms of the teaching role. I think I talk a lot in this book about the role of the faculty member, and as who is teaching the class, as well as the designer, whoever, maybe if that's someone different, is making the, the plans for how the curriculum is going to be laid out. That, as an instructor, I mean, one of the things that I felt was the kind of, I think, biggest key to success was to let the students know what my role was. That if you're working on this project and things are going south and, this person has disappeared, this person is not doing what they're supposed to be doing, we made an agreement, but, Bob is missing, we haven't heard from him for 3 weeks, and what are we supposed to do? Don't wait for 3 weeks because the term is already going, the term is moving forward. That's my job. You tried reaching Bob, couldn't reach him, it's not doing the work or whatever, then contact me and I can help you. So then that way it put, for one thing, it took the pressure off of thinking like, oh no, I'm going to have to deal with, these other students who, why should they answer? They don't answer to me, as a fellow student. This is putting me in an awkward role. Like, no, that's my job. I'm being paid to be the instructor. That's my job. Then that just took a lot of pressure off. And during the many years that I taught this way, I really only had a few situations where people had to contact me with a problem like that. But the fact that they knew they could do that, that I was there, just that took a whole bunch of stress off of them. So I think that's one part of it. And then when a problem like that happens, then that also gives you, that sort of teachable moment thing to be able to say, well, okay, how are we going to, what's the best way to address, this kind of situation, and, what can we learn from it?
All right. Thank you, Janet. Another question. How large of a group is ideal for this model? Someone is wondering about this was based on the previous comment about editorial kind of work that is done and the context, and wondering about having kind of widening it out for input with a large group, narrowing for a small group for editing to the overall model. Do you have any comments about size of group in terms of this editorial process, but also maybe for the taxonomy overall? Do you have a size of group that you have in mind?
Well, in just, from my own teaching experience, I felt like, say, if people were working on small group projects using this model. So, for one thing, just to back up, you might use this kind of model, maybe it's just an activity that is happening in one class today. I mean, we're doing this in one learning activity. And, this activity has, we're going to start and end done today. Or it could be that people are working in a group in a project that goes over a period of weeks, or it might go over the entire term. Then, the way that you're going to organize would be, somewhat different. I think that in terms of the size of the group, I would not do any more than 5 people. I think because then just the amount of time it takes them to communicate and is, and organize, is more challenging. So, I would aim for, kind of smaller groups, have a larger number of small groups rather than, I think if you had a group of 10 or 12 people trying to coordinate something over a period of time, the amount of time, it's like you think about, say, what's the content of, say if I'm teaching a management class, what's the content of management objectives that they have to accomplish this term, and how much time do I have for process? So, there's a balancing act there. And I think, if the project is too large and has too many pieces, then the amount of time taken on for process will be, would just, outweigh, what they could achieve in terms of the curricular goals. So, I would go for a smaller size group. In terms of the editorial function, I mean, it's hard to generalize. An engineering assignment is going to be different than a creative writing class, than a management class, or a humanities class. So, I think that's something that, I go into a fair amount of detail about this stuff in the book that it's just too much to be able to, kind of, make a definitive answer that would fit in a general all cases.
All right. Thank you, Janet. We're having some really good discussion in the chat. Wanted to just point out some people are really liking the idea of adding this as a learning objective into the classroom. We have some examples of breaking out the different components of collaborative skills, like active listening, task division, group progress monitoring, keeping group members accountable. And then we also had a suggestion to have students write group working contract ground rules and giving them like a checklist for self-assessment, peer assessment. I know assessment is a huge part of what Janet tackles in the book. We may not have time to go into it in detail today, but I see some really good suggestions in the chat. And then also a comment about collaboration being like a puzzle, and everything, kind of all the different individual pieces matter. So this is really helpful. Really happy to see this back channel chat.
Right.
Okay. Janet, do you have anything to add based on those comments in the chat?
Well, it's hard for me to, I'll go back and read them later on. And so is there another specific question that we should tackle?
Yeah, let's dive into one more here. Okay, so I'm really curious if there are a couple simple things that instructors can do to immediately help students to collaborate more or better. So if people are kind of at this webinar thinking, what could I do? What can I kind of incorporate into my classroom? Do you have some ideas for them, Janet, of what you might offer? I do see also a question about, is there going to be a follow-up webinar on assessment? That is not the plan right now, but I will share that with my colleagues at Stylus so that they know that there's interest in that. And again, there is, I think, an entire chapter, if not more, on this topic in the book. Is that right, Janet? I know you have quite a bit of detail on assessment there.
Well, I mean, in terms of just, the couple of things I'd like to share. I mean, in terms of things that you can do immediately. The first is in terms of timing. I mean, one of the things that in looking at, say, the ways that I've seen group projects assigned to people that to me were problematic is that the students didn't have enough time to really grasp, here are all the dimensions of this particular project and how are we going to get them done, and what kind of an agreement we're going to make, what the accountability system is going to be, etc. So that, like, say, for example, if the group project is going to start, let's say, in week 3 of the course, I would introduce it in week 1 so that we can have some time to talk about it rather than just dropping it and like all of a sudden get to work and then the stress level and people are uptight. So part of it is building in the time to understand that those process stages do take some thinking and reflection for people to move forward with them. So that's one, is just making sure you have enough time. The second is kind of related point. If I'm looking at, say, I've got this project that I want the students to accomplish. I want them to create an agreement and I want them to get all these things I want them to do. How much of that am I going to say, it would take too much time. There's this balancing act you start to hear as you hear me describe these things. How much time do I want them? I mean, is it important for them to come up with their own unique agreements for each group? Or would it be better for me to create like a template that I give everyone, say, okay, here are all the elements you need to, fill this form out or use this checklist to create an agreement for your group and submit that in. That becomes a deliverable and I can assess. And I can also give you feedback to go like, wait a minute, like you've got like 65 things to do in 1 week. That's not going to work out. Let's spread I can give you feedback on it, so I've got and I've got a sense of what they're doing, but, there's some consistency between the two. So part of it is like trying to balance, how much do I want the students to figure out about all these things we've been talking about, how the tasks are divided and how often you meet and all of that. How much do I want them to figure that out for themselves? And because I feel that they are, mature enough, experienced enough, even if they're children, they could have experience because the school system you're in includes a lot of group work. They're ready for this at 5th grade or whatever. Do they, are they up to it? And they can do this pretty quickly? Or is this going to be like, they're really going to need a lot of time? Maybe I need to create, the system that that everyone will use. So, there's, I think, some decisions around that. And then the final thing I would say, again, reiterating, what are your expectations? What can they expect from you? To say, how, if they're online students, how can they reach you? Do you have online office hours? At what point? I mean, like I said, with my students, I was like, don't let it go beyond 2 weeks, because then you're falling behind and everyone's freaking out. So, if there's a problem, someone's not doing what they're supposed to be doing, or whatever the hurdle might be, the obstacle might be, you can't find the resources or whatever it is, what can they expect of you, so that you become that, truly, as they say, the coach on the side, but that you make sure that they're not going to think, oh, if I contact Janet, she's going to think that I'm, that we're not doing our work and I won't get a good grade. No, that's not the way this is going to work. So, really being clear about who, not only who does what within their group of students, but, what your role is.
Okay, so Janet, we have a couple. Oh, sorry, we have a couple more questions from the audience, but let me let you finish what you were going to say.
Well, I want to just, before we go to the next, which just to quickly share on my from my slides, this idea of using the mapping, because I think that this is something that this model offers, in terms of dealing with some of the things that we've been discussing. So let me just go back to my sharing here. So part of the, as I said at the beginning, the taxonomy is a conceptual framework, but it also creates a visual language. So I have, these, kind of symbolic icons, and these are available. They're available now. It's on the book website from Stylus. You can download and use them to map out the project. So to me, this is part of the kind of agreement stage, is to actually, if it's a larger project that's more than one, a single learning activity, what are the stages of it? How are we going to, so that we've now literally got a shared picture that we can agree upon. And then we can also look at it together and go like, well, wait a minute, I think we need another discussion over here. We need more dialogue, or, if we're going to divide things up, then the next stage needs to be review. We didn't put that in there. So it, gives you, something that you can look at when you're designing something, but also when you're troubleshooting or, assessing the project at the end, where you can look at it and say, well, did it work? If it fell down somewhere, or it could have been improved at some point, at what stage might that have been? So, in the book, I go into a lot of detail about, how to use this, as this kind of visual language. And again, you can download those and use them to create some maps.
Wonderful. Thank you, Janet. Okay, can we squeeze in a couple more questions real quick?
Go for it.
So one says, culturally, I find a difference with collaboration among my students. While some of my international students often almost crave collaboration, some of our other US and other Western trained students resist it. Do you have any tips to bridge that gap in a classroom situation? And she's talking specifically about doctoral level students, but I'm sure other people would be interested in this as well.
Right. Well, I mean, I think there certainly are cultural differences, but they're just individual differences. Some people are, they're people, and they're introverts and they're extroverts. I mean, that's just the way it is. And people who are like, I'd just rather do this myself. And those people sometimes in a team, we think of the problem team person as being the laggard who like didn't get their stuff done on time, and it's sloppy. But on the other end of the spectrum, those people are like, yes, turn me loose, I'm ready, and they're like, trying to take over and do everything, so, trying to balance that out, amongst styles and comfort levels, that's part of the learning experience that you hope the collaborative project will have. From, again, just, based on my research as well as my experience, I think that, the things that I would suggest is, one is having clear expectations around assessment, so that, people are reassured that, that you have a fair system in place. That seems to, because some of the people who are if you want to call it, put it on the Americans. When I did my original research, I thought this was an American thing. And then I interviewed people all over the world, and they all said the same thing. So, those of us who are Americans, we're not the only ones who have this problem. So, I think that to me, having the more structured approach is reassuring to some people, rather than just y'all got a team project, figure it out. To give them some tools, and to include discussion around what these processes entail, common problems people face in solving these, can be reassuring to people. So those are some of the things that I would suggest, is making sure that they understand that, and that they trust. Part of it, we think about trust as an instructor, that we want the students to trust each other, but a big part of it is that they need to trust you as well. So, if you from the beginning can, here are the expectations, and I'm going to do everything I can to make this a fair experience, for everyone, that those things seem to be reassuring to people who might be reluctant.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question, Janet. Someone has asked, have you seen use of your model for faculty development, that is, preparing faculty for collaborative departmental efforts?
Right. Yes, I have. I have done that myself on many occasions, because I've been working with this model for many, many years. I actually did the original research in the first stage of the research, 2005. I'd already been, doing some work earlier than that. So I've continued to work with this, over a long period of time. And, really, when I encountered Stylus, I was like, this is the right publisher for this particular book, just in terms of, aiming at, people who can really use this in design and instruction, so, rather than, say, a textbook per se. But I think, it's, the same issues apply. Right now I'm collaborating with one person in the UK and someone else in Australia on other book projects. And of course, being the one who just wrote the book about collaboration, it's like, you're on the hot seat. So, as I'm working on things myself, I'm constantly reflecting on, well, does do the ideas that I put forward, actually, am I walking the talk, and what else can I learn, that would help to enrich this? So, I think it is valuable in terms of planning, for work-oriented projects, as well as, using it as a basis for instruction. And, the same kinds of things apply in terms of, being aware of the elements, being aware of the options, and saying, well, what is the best way for us to approach this? Should we divide it up into parts? Should we work on it all together, or some combination of the two? And where do we, what kind of communication and review do we need throughout to make sure that, everything is progressing as we'd like it to? Since just seeing some of the notes here, I want to just let you know that I am offering a virtual book tour, which means that, I'm willing to give a number of webinars, so if you have a group, or you're thinking after coming to this or viewing the recording that, this is something you would like to share with others in your institution, then you can contact me, and I will put my, I'm going to put the link to the page where I describe the virtual book tour, and you can contact me about that. And certainly, I think, I'm going to be doing another webinar for the Textbook and Academic Authors Association and other things. So, follow me somewhere, and if this interests you. I love hearing from people about, what, how they're using these tools, what works, what doesn't, this needs more explanation, or I need more tools for that part of it. That's helpful for me, and I can continue to develop things.
Excellent. That is an excellent way to close us out, Janet. Thank you so much. While you're dropping that link into the chat for people who might be interested, I do want to remind our audience that this is recorded, and I will be posting the replay later on today and shooting out an email later on this evening when it is available for replay purposes, if you want to take a look again. Some people were asking about the slides, and I can see if we can post those, or they will be available in the replay video. But of course, you can also learn more about Janet's book through that button at the bottom of your screen. It is available from Stylus Publishing. And I want to thank everyone for the time they took to come today. This was a really fun conversation. I especially enjoyed your questions and the back channel happening in the chat. So thanks, everyone. Janet has offered you a link in the chat, as well as her email if you want to be in touch. I will make sure that those things are also included in the replay where we post the video as well. So thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your afternoon and a wonderful rest of your weekend. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.